The remaining material that was supposed to be released was not, only 11% of it. And the reason why, and most of us are very upset about this, and let me just change the subject for a second. I am interested in the case, obviously. I don't do brains and x-rays and bullets and all that kind of stuff. I'm not interested in how many shooters there were, whether Oswald was or wasn't. I'm interested in who's behind the shooters. That's what I do. That's what my background helps me, informs me to do. But beyond that, it matters for our democracy. However bad it was, whatever happened back there in 1963 is one thing. But to be confronted with a situation where members of our government are still withholding that information is about today. It has nothing to do with back then. And so we need to get over this. We need to get it out. I am not saying that there might not be, and we've already got 5 million pages because of the release, because of the J. Caribbean. But I'm not saying or suggesting that every single thing has to be released. But that amount of material that I believe could still be withheld legitimately, and Trump's the only one who can do it, isn't going to have more than 20 documents. We're talking about the name of a brave person who worked for our country, risking his or her life, and whether that person is alive or dead could imperil their family. And I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. But people have been dead so long that there are very few situations like this that remain. What took place last Thursday was that up until the late afternoon of the 26th of October, 2017, the CIA had not made any appeals. The National Archives and Records Administration was pleading with agencies to do this early, to make life easier for everybody. And the CIA has had 25 years. The language of the law, the JFK Assassination Records Act, is very clear. And so by not submitting any appeals until Trump's on a trip going through Texas and everywhere else, started to make appeals for withholding is insubordinate, and it's to the act and for everybody. I think that, they don't own those files. Those files belong to the American people, and the law says it does. And it does anyway. They're our servants. They're not our masters. So to only come up with 11% is very disappointing. I'll tell you what Trump has decided to do. He wasn't going to sign off on anything. He didn't. The only stuff that got released was 11%, so that tells you how much stuff they were appealing to have withheld. Trump has decided to wait 6 months. And so the other, what is that, 88% or 89% of that stuff, he wants to release it by 26 April of 2018. That's exactly 6 months from last Thursday. He's forcing the CIA and the FBI, anybody else who was to withhold anything, to make their appeals by 12 March. That'll give him enough time by this new 6-month period to look at and intelligently discuss with the principals involved what needs to happen. But he's decreed there will not be a single document withheld in full. There will not be one document withheld in full. He'll argue or be briefed and make decisions about redactions, small redactions. He's made it clear that if he gets an unreasonable request for blacking out a whole page, it's not going to happen. And I hope that what he does after he gets the appeals is to hone in on 3 or 4 or 5 of these massive redactions and demand complete release of that. Stick it in their eye. He pounds on his chest a lot. He likes to do that. So he can show us what kind of a man he is if he really does. And he said, I'm going to be looking really careful at what is being given to me as the reason it has to meet a very high standard. So that's what happened. And so we got very little last Thursday. We had a much bigger release early, the archives did, because they hadn't heard anything from anybody. Nobody, and they warned everybody they were going to come out with an early release, and they did that on 27 July. And there were very good things in that release. There were some things that are interesting in what we got Friday, but I don't want to talk about them. I've looked at them. I've had film crews scrambled out of Washington from countries all over the world, and people keeping me up all hours of the night, really preventing me from having the time to look at some of this stuff. There's been hysteria for the last 5 or 6 days going on. I will tell you that there were good things in there, but the real problem is that nobody wrote a memo saying, let's kill President Kennedy on 22 November 1963 in Dealey Plaza. That's not there. As I said, we've got 5 million pages that were released immediately, or not immediately, but that were released pursuant to the JFK Records Act. And what has to happen is whatever is released now, we need time to compare that to the 5 million pages of stuff that we do have. We have to do that. And so I'm really reticent to answer questions. And if I ever do say something, I'll just say, well, I'll tell you this, but who knows? Tomorrow I might say something different. It's a long process. It's not going to happen in a week. It's not going to happen in a month. It's going to take years to go through this material and beat it back against all the other stuff. You saw how complicated this stuff was. It really is. It's really complicated, and it's a brain breaker. But so I'd appreciate answering any questions you have, but I don't want to talk about any specifics yet. I think it's too early to do that. We just have to be patient, especially to see what happens in the next 6 months. So with that, I'd be happy to talk to you about anything else, as long as it's not brains and bullets and x-rays. Question?
Yeah, so it seemed, and you said a lot of stuff, and I was kind of taking down the notes, but it was kind of difficult. It was very interesting though, but it seemed like you kind of insinuated that the JFK assassination could or was in some way necessary to trap the mole. Could you kind of go more into that, how they could have used the JFK assassination and the hidden Oswald and all that to trap the mole?
Okay, so the mole hunt was still going on because they're using the name, the mark card, Lee Henry Oswald. But something else is going on that has nothing to do with trapping the mole. And so you have Oswald at the beginning of the story being used to smoke out a mole. And you have an operation going on in Mexico City that apparently seems to have some similarities to that. But what's really going on there, and I didn't talk about this all tonight, but it's in both Volume 1 and 2. I have a perspective of the case, and my perspective of the case is built upon working hypotheses and assumptions. I don't call them true, I call them hypotheses and assumptions. And as I go through, I didn't come back to the case in 2013 or 14. That was the end of my first 3 years of research for Volume 1. So I started in 2012, and it's going to take me till 2022 to finish this up. And if I find that any one of those hypotheses or assumptions don't work out, it goes to the trash can, move on to the next one. That's what police work is, right? And that's what's happening here. But I don't have the time, I think, to give you all of the hypotheses and assumptions just now. I'll give you my perspective in a couple of sentences, if you don't mind. So the most important part of this whole story is how they got away with it, why there was no investigation. And the reason is because what was put into motion was a psychological warfare operation to make it appear that a plan that the Kennedy brothers had to get rid of Castro was turned inside out by Castro and they killed Kennedy. Which wasn't true, but Oswald's activities and the people who were directing him made sure that he went to the places in New Orleans and Dallas and Mexico City and did the things necessary to make it look like he was doing the bidding of Castro and the KGB. When he walked into the Soviet embassy in Mexico City and asked for a visa from Valery Kostikov, he was asking for a visa, but the guy he was talking to just so happened to be involved in KGB assassination operations. Whether he was in charge or tentatively linked, it doesn't matter. All that mattered was that the name Kostikov and Oswald showed up in the same telephone call, which actually was, they would fake the telephone calls, it doesn't matter. It ends up in the files. And everything that Oswald did from this time he got back from the Soviet Union in 1962, all the way up to this point, was hidden, put into a place where it wasn't in his tool file, put somewhere where nobody would see it until 22 November 1963. So that after his trip to Mexico City, and there causes all this communication between headquarters and Mexico City Station, between headquarters of the FBI, State Department, all these other departments. The people that are writing those cables don't have any idea. There's nothing in the file. They pull the 201 file and there's no Oswald since May 62. In spite of the fact that we've got the routing slips and we've got the files that people signed off on that whole time. But they're all counterintelligence stuff, like Ann Edgerton. Okay? And although Alan didn't tell his Jane Roman thing, which he does, it's a very important thing, story that a liaison officer in the counterintelligence staff under Angleton, a friend of mine, Jeff Morley, he was a reporter for the Washington Post at the time. We found Jane Roman, the liaison officer for Angleton back in the day, and her initials were on those routing sheets about all these reports that I told you were not available for people to see. They signed, they were reading them and signing off on them, and they were going to be hidden in a secret place.
John, what is a routing sheet?
It's a routing sheet. It's a piece of paper that routes a document. So you put it on top, and everybody who sees the document has to sign their initials and put the date. So it tells you who saw it and when they saw it. But in any event, the problem was that the people in charge of looking at what happened down there in Mexico were unable to tell the FBI, unable to tell the Navy, unable to tell the State Department that he was a bad guy. All the things he did, leafleting Navy guys getting off the boats in New Orleans and pretending to be in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which he wasn't. It was all this stuff. Radio debates, being on even televised, a courtroom drama, all these things were missing. And so the person was writing these memos about what had happened down there and what we should do or not do, had no information. And so had they had that information, had they described what Oswald had done since he got back to the Soviet Union, there's no way Oswald would have been on the parade route. No way. He would have been taken off. And so it's a virus, as I like to call it, that was planted in the files and hidden until the act occurred in Dealey Plaza. And when it did happen, what you have is hysteria at the top secret level that this is going to be World War III and a nuclear holocaust. And President Johnson gets a hold of Earl Warren, Senator Russell, a very respected Southern senator, and wants to form an executive commission and put somebody from the judicial branch of our government in charge, which Earl Warren didn't want to do. What if there's a lawsuit, so he has to recuse himself? You know, he said, no, I'm not doing that. And so then Johnson pulls out the Mexico City story. And you can hear a tape. The evidence for this is very powerful. You can hear a tape, it's available publicly now, of him speaking with Senator Russell a week after the assassination, boasting to Senator Russell how he browbeat our Chief Justice with this story of 40 million dead Americans if we don't, de-link Oswald from Castro and the KGB and Earl Warren Bison. Johnson says, and he broke down and cried and said, Mr. President, is that bad? I guess I'll have to take the job. Well, funny enough, not only do we have that tape, we also have transcripts. I don't know if the tape is still available, but Earl Warren, 10 years later, went on public television in Washington, D.C., WETA, and told exactly the same story. Only thing different, he didn't say he cried. But everything else, and then there were newspaper headlines the next day, Johnson feared World War III, nuclear holocaust. And he said, everybody took the job. So this psych warfare operation is what it worked. It was brilliant. And so what happened was they got away with this operation such that and so that there would be no investigation, and Oswald had to have acted alone. And you have to empathize with Earl Warren. How many people amongst you, if you were told, if you would do this thing, 40 million Americans would live, and if you don't, they'll die? It's a pretty intimidating argument. And so, not just the Chief Justice, but everybody else along the way who was involved in this non-investigation and things that happened for some years, who supported at the secret level delinking a false story, which they didn't know, they thought it was true, weren't part of a pre-existing plot to kill the president. They were doing what they thought was the best thing for America, right? To save lives. And that's my perspective of the case. That's how they got away with it.
So what I'm kind of hearing is that you had kind of different groups of people involved with different phases of kind of creating the situation that we have today, and that generally people in different groups were not aware of the acts that the people in the other groups would take.
That's right.
Or take.
That's right. Are you Anthony?
Huh?
What's your name?
Sophia Cabana.
Okay. I thought it might be somebody else that has been asking me a question. Anyway, yes, that's true. There are different levels. You have, guys with the guns or whatever down there shooting bullets and all that. Just like Oswald, he died. I don't know whether he was shooting or not. Anyway, he was killed, by the way, 2 days later. And anybody else down there with a gun who was doing anything, I assure you, was in a concrete block at the bottom of the ocean. Nobody could live. Was involved. But then you have different assignments at different operational levels, and I'm very interested in a number of people whose names I won't mention tonight, but we know that there are documents on them in this release that didn't happen, and so we're looking for those, and then we're looking for, okay, we extend up to the top levels, like Angleton, he's very high level, or, Alan Dulles, who was fired by Kennedy, or others. But then there are other agencies. There had to be a fireman over there in the FBI and things like that. So there's a lot of operational level people, but at the end of that, we don't have the answer yet. We have people that have been brought into an operation that others, much more powerful than them, decided at some point along the way. And I think Bay of Pigs is really where motive begins to build, and opportunity begins to come together as the Kennedy brothers fashioned their plot to get rid of Castro. But opportunity doesn't happen until 1963, when they set up the motorcade route and Oswald goes Cuban. So I'm looking at the beginning of the volume I'm doing now, volume 3, at Wall Street. I'm looking at the Wall Street law firms and other people that hated Kennedy. And we spent, my interns, 2 of them were here, lots of time investigating, reading every Wall Street Journal op-ed, and it's clear that right out of the gate there was not just anger but raw hatred for the domestic policies of the president, his fiscal and monetary strategy, and all the brains that he brought in And there's a lot of work to do, but I'm starting to do that. I'll have 2 or 3 chapters in volume 3 that actually focus on some of those people as well. They sat on the same boards. The Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles was head of the State Department. Alan Dulles was head of the CIA, and they were sitting on the same board of directors of these companies, these Wall Street law firms, who handled the interests of all the sugar companies, all of the huge cattle ranches, all of the gambling casinos, and other businesses. That billions and billions of dollars went down the drain when Castro came in, and they wanted him out. And so when Kennedy would put the guys ashore, the Marines ashore, and the Air Force with the Exile Brigade, that's when the whole thing really starts to fester. And it doesn't get any better during the Cuban Missile Crisis. But the people, ultimately, that I'm chasing here, as I say, the people behind the shooters, or the operational people, the people behind them, they didn't decide. Even those people didn't, it wasn't their idea. They were playing along because they knew who these people were. And so that's something for volume 4 or 5. I'm really on a long-term trajectory here, working my way up through this year and the next year and the next year, and trying out my assumptions and hypotheses, and I dump some into the trash can and I keep some. It's going to keep going that way.
Dr. Newman, there was a key moment in your interview in the company of Washington Post reporter Jefferson Morley, November 3rd, 1994. You were sitting in the home of Jane Roman, who 31 years earlier had signed off on information which she knew was false and misleading in response to a routine inquiry from the Mexico City station about what do we have on this guy Oswald. It was the first week of October 1963. It was 6 weeks prior to the assassination. Jane Roman is a liaison desk officer who doesn't make protocol and is not deciding to do something on her own. But she's a reliable professional in a very, very important position. 31 years later, you took her chronologically from the middle of 1962 until literally a few days prior to that request from the Mexico City station. And you showed her all of the documentation with her signature on it, indicating that she was apprised, she was aware of things that certain other people inside the CIA were not aware of. Would you mind telling us what she said first when you asked her, what's your take on this? And second, after you asked her, does this indicate to you an operational interest in Oswald 6 weeks prior to the assassination?
Well, like you said, I showed her the documents first. Then I showed her the routing slips with her initials on them. Mm-hmm. And then I asked her about what that meant. And after she saw the last document, the sides of her mouth curled up towards her ears. And she got it. Because I already had her on record. We had 2 tape recorders going that day, mine and Jeff's. And so she said to me, I'm signing off on something that's not true. And that was a real breakthrough right there. And I said, no, why? Were you signing off on something that's not true? He said, look, I wasn't involved, really. I wasn't involved in the hanky-panky. It's indicative of a keen operational interest in Lee Harvey Oswald. And that's not supposed to happen either, right? They're not supposed to be interested at all in the SAS, the Cuban Affairs staff. So that was one of those breakthrough moments. It was not that long after the JFK Records Act. And there was this feeling like, okay, it's okay to talk now, right? And so there was no reason why not to just engage it. And she did. And I put her in a position by asking her in the right sequence where she just blurted it out.
So, if I may, what she said in response to your direct question, which was recorded and transcribed by the Washington Post Transcription Service, you said, if I recall correctly, it's possible I don't, but I believe you said, I guess what I'm asking you to address head on here is, does this indicate to you an operational interest in Oswald 6 weeks prior to the assassination? And her response, without missing a beat, was, yes, to me it indicates a keen interest, held very closely on a need-to-know basis. Tell us what happened when you and Jeff walked out of the house.
Well, we just wondered what had taken place with it. The chains moved down the football field a little bit that day, just like they did with Malcolm Blunt and Pete Bagley. Yeah.
John?
Yeah.
Up at the 30,000 foot level here, can you give them maybe a little idea of what happened with the president's brother, Bobby Kennedy, the attorney general, who was charged with investigating the murder of federal officers, in this case his brother? How did he get bumped off the case?
He bumped himself off the case at first. He was just devastated because the way it looked is to him that because he was very intimately involved in the anti-Castro operation and had been involved in that ever since the Bay of Pigs had happened. He sat in on every meeting. Anyway, it looked to him, and this was part of the plan. They were very clever to know that if you can neutralize the attorney general, it's going to help. And they had an ally in his deputy, Katzenbach. So it looks to him like he got his brother killed, almost got us into World War III. That's what he's thinking. And that's the way it was made to look. Yeah. So he didn't do very much for a while. He took a little time off. But then eventually, he made some phone calls to, the names aren't important, but the people that he thought he was dealing with, he called somebody up and said it wasn't one of your guys, wasn't it? And it was part of something he had been involved in. So he was very, very upset. But that didn't last long. And people understood, including RFK, what the deal was. And RFK and the Kennedy family started investigating the case on their own. RFK went down to Mexico City. Not very well known. Senator Monahan was used by the family for investigating the case. So Robert Kennedy was involved in it, but publicly he never said anything to indicate that he was his true perspective. And until his son, RFK Jr., a couple of years ago, appeared on, what's that guy's?
Sherman Rose.
Yeah, Charlie Rose show, that's right. And said my father always felt it was a conspiracy. So, yeah, the RFK angle on this is a cruel one. Very cruel. Are there any other questions that any of you? Yes, sir.
Did Ham Ballers have anything to do with anything?
Yeah, he was on the Warren Commission.
He was also disappeared too.
Yeah. A lot of people disappeared in the next 2 or 3 years. Yeah. But Senator Russell didn't believe anything that they wrote in the report, and they had to really twist his arm to get him to sign on to the thing. He knew for a fact that it was bogus, and he didn't like it. Russell was an ethically based person. But there was who else? There was another person on the commission that didn't want to sign up to it. But anyway, yeah.
I got one more question. Was Oswald employed at the book depository?
Mm-hmm.
How did he know to get a job there?
Well, this is really not my area, but obviously you need him there, so somebody arranged for him to get employment there.
I mean, you don't know where a president's going 2 or 3 days before he...
Oswald didn't know anything.
No, I know.
Right? So somebody else might know.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, that would be the perfect answer to Oswald not being involved.
Right. So I don't know about that. And I don't even want to start thinking about it because I'm really challenged with all the stuff I'm trying to think about. And there's a lot of people at that water cooler down in Dealey Class, and every time I'm going to Dallas in a few weeks, and that's what's going to happen. Is all these guys are going to be arguing with each other about which bullet went where, and who went up and down the staircase and who was standing next to who and all that stuff. And I'll just listen and I'll do my thing. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I got enough ball on my platter trying to find out who's behind it, not who's doing it. Yes.
Sort of, I guess, going back to who's behind it, or more so what these motives could have been. Do you think that this was more something to get rid of Kennedy or something to get Johnson in as president?
Well, That's a little bit of both, right? Because he's the vice president, so if you get rid of him, he's coming in, right? So-
And what would be the intention, you think, specifically? Because I guess another thing is that usually in government, there's other kind of secret organizations, not like intelligence organizations like the CIA, but other groups with their own separate interests that are involved in each of these.
Well, I mentioned to you a lot of corporations and their law firms on Wall Street, a lot of money, okay? And so that didn't happen in the end, right? So what happens is it actually morphs a little bit. It's really a lot about Cuba, but by the time you get to the middle of 1963, you know it's really about Vietnam. And so what happens is when you reach, we're already, the plot is afoot. But Johnson doesn't go into Cuba. There's no interest. The Cuban thing at that point had been used to make it look like Castro did it, and that stopped the investigation. But what changes as a result of the assassination is the way to ask your question. What happens with Johnson after Kennedy's killed? And what happens is the Kennedy's plan to withdraw from Vietnam, which had already been started, is put to bed. If Kennedy lives, can you imagine the world we grew up in and lived through? It wouldn't have happened. And so that's what happens as a result of it. And they got what they wanted. There was a Christmas party in 1963 December. This is what, a month after the assassination. And a very well-known author who wrote a book on Vietnam was actually present in the hallway, overheard President Johnson tell the Joint Chiefs, just get me elected and have your damn war. That's what he said. So he didn't, Johnson really voted for it, but he understood that that was what the price of power was. So Vietnam becomes more important as we move late into the year. It's not the prima facie motive. It just wasn't on the radar screen as much as Cuba was. But eventually it becomes part of the equation.
Any other questions? We're dismissed.